Hey everyone, it is Mike the Dad Nerd here. And if you are like me, you're really into home automation and home security and really monitoring your home. And a big part of that for me is running Blue Iris to capture, monitor, and record all of the security cameras I have around my home. I have around 8 cameras, and recording and being notified of certain events and being able to identify people versus cars is really important to me. And I've gone through a lot of different ways of installing Blue Iris and running it. I used to run it on its own hardware in my server rack, but now I have the whole environment virtualized within Unraid, and it works really well for me. So today I wanted to share with you a few tips on how to get Blue Iris up and running on Unraid, how to run CodeProject AI in a Docker container on Unraid, connect the two, and some optimal settings in Blue Iris that I find make my cameras run a lot smoother. So let's jump right in. So there are plenty of great tutorials out there on how to create a VM, and specifically a Windows VM on Unraid. But I wanted to share with you a few of the settings that I have in my VM for Windows that, number one, allow it to start up and work on the first time. And then secondly, I like to pass one specific disk into the Blue Iris VM where it's storing all of the footage. I actually don't save my footage to the array in Unraid. I have an unassigned disk, so I have one separate disk that I specifically assign in for its sole exclusive use in the Blue Iris VM. And that way the wear and tear is really only on one disk. For me, in the home environment, it's not extremely important that all of this footage is saved. Really, you just want to make sure it's there when you need it, when there's been an incident. So I use one 4 terabyte unassigned disk, and I'll show you guys how to pass that through. So as we look at Windows here, when I set this up, I give my machine 8 gigs of RAM, and I also give it a majority of my CPU. You can see I'm using here a Ryzen 5 5600X, and I allow it to use a majority of the cores. Right now, it really only utilizes about 10 to 15% of the overall CPU, and that's with 8 cameras running, and it's a mix match of some 1080p, but a majority 4K cameras. As we scroll down, the biggest thing here is on BIOS. If you're going to be running Windows 11, which I am, you really want OVMF and its TPM. So you want the TPM version for your BIOS. As you go down, you'll select your installer media when you go to set this up for the first time. Again, plenty of great tutorials out there on how to spin up a Windows VM, and then it's just installing Blue Iris from there. As we go down, the two things that I want to talk about are my primary vDisk location and my secondary disk location. So what I did was I created a primary vDisk, and that's where the operating system is going to be installed on for Windows. I put this in my array, so I have a domain share, that's the standard share for Unraid, and I created a vDisk for it to install to. Doesn't matter the size, that's really just for the install. Typically around 64 to 100 gigs is what I like to do for Windows. But the second item here is the second disk that I use to store all the footage. So the way I have my Blue Iris set up is as it's initially recording, it's writing to this primary vDisk location. This is actually on an SSD, and I like the primary writes when it's first pulling in the footage to go to a fast storage like an SSD. So I have it record here, but it's only keeping a few gigs of files on that, and then it transfers it over to my hard drive. So what I did was when I'm mapping this hard drive in, I actually did it by the ID of the unassigned disk. So let me show you how you find that ID real quick. Over on the main tab of Unraid, you will have your unassigned disk. So once you have a disk that is not in the array, you're able to assign it as an unassigned disk. So what I did was I did the past feature. So I passed this disk through. And what you really want to do is you want to click on dev1 or click on the name of that disk. And this is the identification that you are looking for. So you know that when you're picking your disk by ID, you want to make sure it matches this right here. So let's go back to that VM template as we add our second disk. So now that we're back in the VM template, what you're going to want to do is you're going to select manual, and then you're going to put dev/dev/by-id/ and then you want to put ATA. It is important you put the ATA in front, hyphen, and then paste that identification right back in. When you're selecting this, I have it spun up right now so it's not showing, but as you start to type dev disk by ID, it should pull up some of the disks. Just make sure that you're putting ATA in front of that disk identifier. You'll also notice that I don't pass through a GPU to the Blue Iris VM. And that's because all of the AI that I do in a Docker container in Unraid. That way, my GPU, I have a GTX 1060 in my Unraid machine. I want that GPU to be used for multiple things. I want Plex to be able to use it, CodeProject, Unmanic, whatever it might be. I want that GPU to be able to utilize by all of my Dockers. And if I passed it through to this VM is going to be the only thing that can utilize that GPU. So I don't pass through a GPU, and I find that I don't really need it. For Blue Iris, I write direct to disk, so I don't do much transcoding of the video as it comes in, and it works just fine for me. So real quick, let's actually talk about the CodeProject AI Docker container that I run. I go to Community Applications. If you go to your App Store in Unraid, and you just search for CodeProject AI, CodeProject, you want CodeProject AI Server GPU. And that is what you can use as a template to install the project as a Docker container. So when you install that, there's really not much to that container. The one thing you'll want to do is you'll want to click onto Advanced View, and you will want to make sure that you do the --GPUs all in the extra parameters, so it does have access to your GPU. But again, big benefit of running this in a Docker is that it's pulling that AI out and it's utilizing the GPU, but that GPU is not just limited to being in that VM for Blue Iris. I have a bunch of other Docker containers that all utilize that same GPU. Now I have remoted into that virtual machine, that Windows 11 virtual machine on Unraid, and I have opened up my Blue Iris dashboard. And there's a few settings that you need to do to get CodeProject working, and especially to get it working when it's not running natively in Windows alongside Blue Iris. So let's go in and change those settings right now. If you go into your settings and you go to AI, this is where you're going to set up where your AI server sits. So what I do is I check mark the Use AI server. 10.0.3.50 is the IP address of my Unraid machine. So you want to plug in that IP address, whatever the IP address is for your Unraid machine. And then the port that you set. If you didn't change it, 32168, or just make sure that that port matches when you set up CodeProject AI, it'll tell you what port it is running on. And then you do want to click on Use Custom Models, and that's it. Now it will be able to go out and reach out to that Docker container that is running on Unraid and utilize it for the AI. The next step would be to get all of our cameras set with the proper settings for them to utilize the AI and for it to work well. You'll notice here that I have 8 cameras, and what I decide to do is I actually set all of my settings for recording and alerts and AI on one camera, and I tell the rest of them to use those same settings from that one camera. So that way, if I want to make a change or make a tweak, I only have to do it to one camera, and I can apply that to the rest. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. So if we go to camera settings, the AI is going to be under the alert. So if we go to alert, you want to click on artificial intelligence. And here are the settings that I have found. I've tweaked with a lot of these settings and played with them, and these ones tend to work best for me. So first of all, you want to make sure that CodeProject AI or DeepStack is checked. For me, I like to confirm person, cars, trucks, buses, or just general vehicle. You also want to tell it that you want it to use the custom model IPCam-combined. So IPCam-combined is a specific model in CodeProject that works really well with these type of security cameras, and I find that it gives the best detection. So that's what you want in custom model. And then for marking as a vehicle, I tell it to say a car, a truck, a bus, or just general vehicle, say that all those are vehicles. And then fire actions, I do only when confirmed. So that means that it is going to go out and confirm that it finds a person or a truck, and then that is what is going to trigger the action and not before. You can do always, confirmed, or AI timeout error, but only when confirmed works for me. Canceled alerts, so if there is movement, for example, in my doorbell camera right now, we have Halloween decorations up, and they often blow in front of the camera, which triggers a motion alert, but then the AI says, okay, there was motion, but it's not a person, it's not a car, so I'm going to ignore it. This is what you want it to do with those ignored. So if it's canceling the alert, if it's saying there's not a person or a car, what do you want it to do? I just have it delete. You can have it move to a canceled alert list. You can remain on the alerts list, whatever works best for you. I used to have it on move to canceled, and then I just decided to go ahead and delete those alerts. Now going down into these checkboxes, this is typically where people kind of debate on what works best. But for me, the ones I really like are new alert analysis on re-triggered after cancellation. I like that. Burn the label markup onto the alert image. I save the AI analysis details. That's really good for if you're having issues with your AI on if it's detecting too much or too little, you have a lot of false positives. You can at least save the AI analysis and pull that in and see what it thinks it's detecting. And then I do static object analysis, and I do check mark that box. Going up here, these are also important settings. Now, depending on where you have your cameras, depending on the quality of your cameras, you may need to adjust these. But for me, what works well is 50% min confidence. I do 8+ real-time images, and I analyze one every 500 milliseconds. These settings seem to work well for almost all of my cameras. I don't typically need to make any changes. So that's it for the AI, and that works well. And then if you go back to record, what you can do is I have mine on continuous recording but that's not the best utilization of disk space. This on my system gets me about 14 days of continuous high quality recording, which I'm fine with. That's enough for me. But if you're someone who wants to store a lot longer time frame of footage, say you want a few months, what you may want to do is you may want to go to continuous plus alerts. So what continuous plus alerts will do is if you have a mainstream and a substream quality on your camera, it'll record 24/7 on the substream, meaning it'll record at a lower quality and take a lot less disk space. And then whenever the AI says, hey, there's a person or a truck, it'll switch and record at using the mainstream or the higher quality stream. So that is a great way to save a lot of space. Just me, for my own system, I like to just be recording continuous at the higher level, but then also have it tell me on the timeline view where it saw people or cars or the like. So you'll notice here that if I hit I'm going to hit cancel here. If I want to apply that same AI strategy to other cameras, all I have to do, so this camera is called Driveway West. Let's say I want to apply that in my garage. I go to camera settings, I go to alert, and you'll see that all this is grayed out, and it's because what I did was I said sync with camera, and I picked that Driveway West. So this is what I have done on all my other cameras, so that I only have to change Driveway West, and anything in this section will be applied just like I did it to each individual camera. That same setting applies on all of these different tabs. So you'll notice for me, I use it for recording, for triggering, and that way, I'm only setting it in one place. With those settings in place, you can see down here that my machine runs pretty efficiently. It's using about 8% of the CPU, and it's using roughly 800 to a gig of memory, which for this overall system, for everything it's doing, is fantastic. Now, what you do have to keep in mind is that CodeProject AI as a Docker, that is also using its own set of memory and processing. The processing is extremely low on the CPU because it's using the GPU, but it does use about 3 gigs of RAM. So for me, all in all, I devote 8 gigs of memory to the Windows VM, and then CodeProject AI on top of that is utilizing about 3 gig of RAM. So I know that about 12 gig of RAM is devoted to my Blue Iris box and essentially my Blue Iris service. If that's too much for you, if you don't have that much RAM, you may want to look at running CodeProject AI in that actual VM and maybe passing a GPU through. But this way is just probably the most efficient way, and again, it frees up that GPU for you to use in other instances. I really hope this video helped you get your Blue Iris VM up and running on Unraid, and maybe running a little better than it was before, especially with the AI, and also freeing up your GPU for other Docker containers. I know that this tutorial was a little more at the 30,000 foot view, not going through the step-by-step of getting things installed, like installing the VM and installing Blue Iris. I'm happy to answer questions down in the comments. And also, if you guys do want a more feature-length, beginning-to-end install of this, let me know in the comments. If that's something that you guys want, happy to do it. But again, drop comments down below. I do videos all about home labs, hosting, Unraid, smart home, and we're starting to pick back up. It's been a few years since we were in the YouTube game, but we're back now putting out some new content. So hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. It really does help me out. And hope to see you guys soon. Mike the Dad Nerd, tech on.